Hello, welcome to week 7 of your technical math course. This week we are covering 2 chapters as we've been doing in some of our previous weeks, but this week those 2 chapters are completely and totally different from each other. So the first chapter we're going to be covering is chapter 11, and it kind of builds off of the things that we were doing last week. This week we're going to be learning in chapter 11 how to solve quadratic equations. Chapter 12, however, is all about geometry, so a totally different topic compared to the quadratic equation piece. So let's take a quick look at the quadratic equation chapter. Excuse me, I want to point out to you that we're actually learning how to solve a quadratic equation. So in other words, we're trying to find a number that will make this particular equation true. And these are several examples of quadratic equations. Quadratic equation simply means that it is of the degree 2. So it's got something squared in it. You can see how it could have an x squared, a y squared, an a squared, an m squared. Doesn't matter as long as it's got a square symbol in it. And as long as the number in front of that squared variable is not 0, it's greater than 0. So that's considered the standard form of a quadratic equation. So what we want to do is we want to figure out how can we solve this? How can we figure out what that variable is equal to? And so this chapter is going to basically go through 3 principles, 3 ways to solve quadratic equations. So I'm just going to kind of briefly go over them. There are some examples in these slides, but I just want to kind of go over them very, very quickly. So if it's in a form, for example, like this, x squared equals 25, we can see that we can easily take the square root of both sides to figure out what x is going to be equal to. Keep in mind, whenever we do a square root, it's going to be plus or minus. So the square root of x squared is going to be plus or minus 5. Okay, so keep that in mind. So here's the first example. We have the equation 5x squared equals 15. We're going to divide both sides by 5. We get x squared equals 3. And then we use the principle of square roots by taking the square root of both sides. So x is going to equal the square root of 3 or the negative square root of 3. So plus or minus the square root of 3 is how we typically say that. So that is one particular example. Here's another example. Again, we've got something squared on one side and something constant on the other side. It's working the exact same way, except for this time, notice when we take the square root, we're going to get x plus 3 on the left side, but on the right side, it's going to be either the square root of 7 or the negative square root of 7. And then we just isolate the variable by subtracting 3 from both sides. So that's the process, excuse me, of just finding the square root. Okay, so that's one way. The other way that you're going to look at is completing the square. So in order to complete the square, in other words, we're trying to make it look pretty. We're trying to make it be something where we can easily have 2 factors that are the same. So in order to do completing the square, we have to take the x coefficient. So that's the number that's in front of the x term, not the x squared term, the x term. We're going to take that number and take half of it. And then we're going to square that answer. That number that we've taken half of and squared, we're going to add to both sides of the equation. Remember, if we do add something to both sides of the equation, we haven't changed the equation. We're keeping it the same. So once we've done that, then we can proceed by taking the square root of both sides using the principle of square roots. So this is an example of how to do that. So the first step that they did was to move that 4 to the other side. So subtract 4. That's how we got it over here. Then we're going to take the coefficient of the x. So that's the 10. We're going to take 10 divided by 2. and that's the work that they showed you over here. That's 5, and 5 squared is 25. So this is how they got that 25. Then they added that 25 to both sides of the equation. Now you can see that this is x plus 5 quantity squared. So when we factor this side, we have a perfect square, and it's going to equal 21. Then we can just use our principle of square roots to complete it. The last thing that they're going to show you, oh, and by the way, I do have a slide that kind of goes through it step by step so that you can see how to do that. The last thing they're going to show you in this chapter as far as solving a quadratic equation is using the quadratic formula. And that's, you're just going to plug and chug it into the formula, each of these different coefficients, and then that's going to give you your answer. So remember, the form has to be in the standard form, so ax squared plus bx plus c. You have to identify your a, your b, and your c first. So once you've identified those coefficients, a, b, and c, we're going to plug those into the formula and solve for x, and that's all there is to it. And then the second chapter you're going to be covering is all about geometry this week, and I think you'll find that to be much easier. But as usual, if you are having any troubles at all with anything, please make sure that you reach out to me. That's what I am here for, and have a great week.